Welcome to the Erie Wellness Podcast, your go-to source for all things health, wellness, and living your best life right here in Erie. I'm your host, Lauren Brunetti, and I'm so excited to have you here. Each episode will dive into conversations with local experts and wellness professionals who are making an impact in the world of health and well-being. Before we jump in, be sure to like, share, and comment on this episode. We love hearing from you and seeing our community grow. Now let's get started. So welcome to the podcast, Erik. It's truly an honor to have you here. Your passion for transforming lives through health and well-being is really inspiring. And just in the amount of short of time that we've known each other, it's clear that this work is not just what you do, but it's really your true purpose. So with decades of experience and a deep commitment to helping others heal and thrive, your approach, it also blends wisdom, science, and heart in a way that changes lives. So we're so happy to have you here on the podcast and are grateful for the opportunity to get to talk to you today.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm really grateful to be here.
What type of clients do you typically work with today now that your home base is now in Erie?
My career had started out really because I was a professional athlete. Most of the folks that I hung out with were also professional athletes. So I was doing their health and wellness care. And that really radically changed back in 2000 for me. And so it's grown to where I work with anybody who wants to work with me. And the common thread is that most of them have been really struggling specifically with their health. Most of the folks I work with are 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of age. And so that's really been the main thing is I'm working fewer of my clients are top athletes. Most are what we call the everyday ordinary individual who's making a difference in other ways.
Mm-hmm. What type of athlete were you?
I was a pro triathlete. I was a competitive swimmer growing up. I rode my bicycle everywhere, ultimately went into racing bicycles. And then one of my buddies challenged me to do a triathlon with him because he was going and doing it. And I won the race and I won, dozens of triathlons. Ultimately, then I had a sponsor asking me to go ahead and represent their company.
We'll transition to wellness here, but what inspired you to pursue a career in health and wellness, and how has your practice evolved over the last 45 years?
When I went to college in '79, some of my fellow teammates had aches and pains, and so I would just naturally start to use my hands on them. And they said, you know what, you're doing better work than any of these massage therapists. Ding, I went out and got a massage table, and I've been practicing professionally since September of 1979.
Okay.
So that's kind of how that got started.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about that background. So when you and I met originally, just to kind of discuss you being on the podcast, you talked a lot about your MEES method, which incorporates a holistic approach to wellness and well-being. Can you share with our listeners what your MEES method is and how it helps individuals align with their best interests and just like what's going on in their life?
Yeah, so the MEES acronym is spelled with a big M, a little E, an apostrophe, and a big S. And I invite anybody listening to this, grab a sheet of paper or grab your phone, start putting some notes on it. The big M is movement. We all must move. So that's the first part of it. The little E, I use that because in scientific formulations, little E represents energy. And well, where do we get our energy? And it's kind of complex, right? So the combination of movement and how we're eating is actually how we create the energy in our body. And then that big S, 1/3 of our life, all of us must sleep. And the apostrophe before an S, if I learned one thing from school, is that that's taking ownership of how one moves or they don't move, taking ownership in how we eat or we don't eat, taking ownership how we sleep or we don't sleep. But here's the double helix of the MEES method. That big M is also for our mental, our mindset. The little E are our emotions, and emotions is just strictly energy in motion. The apostrophe can represent the physical, or it can be the psychology. And so I use a lot of those dynamics in this program. And then the big S is everything is spiritual in nature. So coming back to that, so how I do or I don't move, there's always a mindset. There's something mental linked with it. There's always an emotion with it. There's always the physiology, the psychology, and the physical body and spiritual. And so I use the MEES acronym to help my clients see a much more comprehensive aspect to addressing their health.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I've even, I feel like it was diet and fitness, and that's what people focused on when it comes to when you just kind of dip your toes in what wellness is. But the more you dive in, you realize there's so many more components to that to impact our overall well-being. So that's a good way to visualize it too, is just MEES written out twice with that apostrophe.
And the other parts and pieces, so when folks are working with me, they get to actually begin to understand the organ systems of the body. And so in movement, every muscle is on one of the 12 primary movement systems, but there's also stored, or I oftentimes call them the black boxes. There's issues stuck in our tissues that people aren't aware of. And so the MEES method, whether it is the focus on the moving, the eating, and the sleeping, that helps us to really access and clear out those traumas of the body, or to really expand into that infinite possibility.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll talk about the first me. So let's talk about movement.
So having been an athlete from a very young age, movement has always been a really key part to me. And I was really fortunate. There was a gentleman back in the 70s, and I actually became a personal trainer for his company. And he taught me to inhale while I'm lifting, exhale while I'm lowering the weight. That was completely contrary to everything that is still even taught in most situations today. I also realized that when I was having a tight muscle, the traditional way of addressing, say, stretching, wasn't actually helping me. And I came across a research program of 10,000 people, and they found that the vast majority of all traditional stretches are actually creating the imbalances, the traumas, the injuries in our athletes. And then a gentleman, he passed away right about 2 years ago, Robert Guida. I was handed a copy of his book called Total Body Training. And in that book, he was really sharing that the traditional stretching doesn't work in the physical body the way that people have believed. He also believed in a more global aspect to movement. And even though he was one of those few 3-time physique bodybuilder champions, I noticed in that system, his theories were great, but how he was going about it was the same as everybody else, which is to isolate joints and muscle groups, to isolate the function. And so in 1987, I took active range of motion, and then I started to integrate it into the global function and all the energetic pathways in the body. And if I can use one example, these days people talk about moving from your core or your heart, your center, whatever we want to call that. And I said, these movements are much more like a chain on a bicycle. Show me what is the core of that chain. And what that does is it allows people to start to open up into all of these energetic pathways, connect from fingertips to toe tips. And so with all of these movements, we are free to move in any direction. Nothing is limiting me. And so with traditional free weights, gravity only pulls in a straight line. But we have a lot of other forces off in any direction. So the pure three-dimensional movements began with something called a constant moving force, a CMF machine. I've since greatly improved that. And also I created something called the gym in a bag. So no matter where on this planet, we can literally go to a place where there's no gravity, and we can use the gym in the bag to maintain our health and strength, even if we're up on, say, the space station with that. The difference between three-dimensional and six-dimensional is simply bringing one's awareness to what are their thoughts, what are the emotions, what's the spirit, And what's really beautiful, when people see these movements, they go, oh, I can do that. And then they notice they can't do it, or it's really incredibly challenging. And so that's how this whole combination, the double helix of the Mies method, they become aware of, and we can start to go through and create that healing. The other piece is we are the byproduct of our daily activities. And if we go and look at what is traditionally being done, there's a lot of the body's motions that are not addressed. And with that, we can't be at our full life's purpose. We can't have the full emotional expression. There's a lot more to it.
Mm-hmm. So with that method, is there a correct way or incorrect way to do certain movements, you said?
Yes and no. So I invite people to bring their awareness into something. So on, say, the leg exercises, you'll be standing on one leg. And a lot of people do not have very good balance whatsoever. So the movement will begin with that. And then we'll have the other leg that's connected out to the very distal part of the foot. And then they begin to do various movements, and they can feel this strengthening of this full pathway in the body. And in the beginning, I invite very intentional movements. The leg might be straight, moving through an arcing motion, but then I might have them go to bend, extend. But just as they begin to develop that efficiency, I then invite them to change. Let's say we're focusing on the full global function of their hip. I'll invite them, well, what are all the variabilities that you can do at your foot and ankle?
Mm-hmm.
Can you change that? And the knee is not just flexing and extending, but if you start to bring your awareness and you're changing your knee rotation while you're going through this movement, or if you're extending your hip, you start to add in internal or external rotation or adduction or abduction. So in the beginning, I invite a focused intention, and then I take these parts and pieces. And if I use music as an example, one can learn how to play individual notes. But this is a systemology that then starts to move those notes in a way that creates a beautiful sound. And it's the gap. There's another part here. It's that time between the notes that actually creates the music. And that's that connection into one's human spirit that you then decide how you want to interact, how you want to dance in your body, how you want to use your physical body.
Okay. And when you were working with me a little bit on Saturday and having me do a squat, I feel like I thought I could do a squat, but my range of motion was just not there. So I've been practicing working on my squatting correctly and actually getting back to that full seated position.
So Lauren, you just brought up a really great example. You thought you could do a squat. I want to cancel that out because you did do a squat. You did squat. The refinements here now is that your squat was through a partial range of motion. You started standing tall, and you went down and you stopped at a certain point. And at that certain point, because there was a disharmonious relationship between your whole musculoskeletal system, you weren't able to go beyond that point without some type of assistance in that. And so we bring to your awareness, first of all, let's cancel that you can't do a squat, because the truth is you can do a squat. You just maybe weren't able to get the full range of motion. Since we're on camera here, I'll just say that this positioning here of my arm and elbow is the full contraction of my biceps. But my arm would be extended back at about a 45-degree angle. That's the full length of the bicep. So if somebody is doing the traditional bicep curls, they, like you with that squat, you had a partial range of motion without an awareness that, oh my goodness, there's so much more to this. If I can share also, the squat is what I call, it's an innate movement, and it's a constitutional movement. When somebody has a limited range of motion, or the timing of this musculoskeletal system are out of sync, one does not have full function of the organ system. of the digestion, absorption, and elimination. And so the squat is one of the most important things that any of us, and the reason being, right, we have these small rooms with these ceramic thrones that stop us, or I'm sitting on a stool that can move all around. I lose that which I'm not using. And so to really have full health and vitality, we want to restore this as soon as possible. And it relates to so much more of our experience in life.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about movement. Now let's talk about the eating component. So can you share the story behind creating Nature's Essential Food Groups and what it makes it unique compared to other dietary guidelines we might see? You know, I feel like when we were younger, we all saw like the pyramid as to what we should be eating. Now you see a lot of like healthy fats, proteins, like macros. But what is your category of like food groups?
I'll just share that food became an interest of mine at the age of 12 when I was diagnosed with very severe anemia. I started to listen to a gentleman on a New York radio station, Gary Null. Many people have maybe heard of him. And I started to really get an interest, but really fast forward to 2000, I had an opportunity to meet a gentleman, and he was the chief scientific officer for the world's largest working plant library. Smithsonian has the largest plant library, but it's not a working library. What it means is that they've just got a collection of the, I'm going to just say about 400,000 plants that are here on this earth. And so when I got an opportunity to meet this scientific officer, they cataloged the chemical composition. At that point in 2000, it was about 15,000 different plants that they had cataloged the chemical composition. What also set this really unique is back in 1999, they also created the world's first all-natural genomic and proteomic labs. So all the other labs were used at the university level or in private corporations strictly to create pharmaceutical drugs and to see how they're working. But in this particular lab, they were looking at what are these compounds from plants and how do they work at our genomic level. And so I asked this gentleman one day, I said, so do roots have any compounds that aren't a part of the rest of the plant? He goes, And I said, so does that mean that the stem might have other compounds? And he's like, yes. And then ultimately, when we went through, and I just mentioned all these different parts and pieces of these plants and also other foods. So we're a hybrid. We're not meant to be a vegetarian, and we're not meant to be a carnivore. We're meant to be somewhere between those two. And so after weeks of dialoguing with this gentleman, with this company, that's how I came up with Nature's Essential Food Groups.
Okay. So now let's talk a little, this is one that I'm really curious on because as a mom of 3 young kids, I feel like one of my wellness goals for the year is to get more sleep. So can you talk about your deep restorative sleep program you created in the early 90s and how it addresses like a critical aspect of our health?
Returning to nature, right? Because we can talk about all the artificial lighting. We can talk about the rooftops of buildings that disconnect us from, the sky above and the natural cycles of the earth, right? There's times of day when the temperatures get warmer. And then there's times of day when the temperature gets cooler. There's times of day when it's darkness coming into the early time of day. And there's different spectrums of light that works with the different components, the different organ systems. People have oftentimes heard of circadian rhythms and that. And people's rhythms are so out of balance these days. So there was a gentleman, and actually I back up. So many people coming to me to resolve their health conditions. There were a lot of them that were coming in from sleep studies that were done, and things were all over the place. But I also didn't notice any of them resolving their sleep issues. And in observation, the empirical evidence, we know that if we take people out into nature, provide them with shelter and that, but no artificial lighting, none of the computerized stimulus. And let me just say one thing. I love the technology of automobiles and planes and trains and computers, right? I'm not anti any of this stuff. But when you put somebody out in nature, even those who are sworn on whatever, right, that they are a night owl, so far, no one has ever been the night owl. It doesn't mean that they weren't assigned watch keep to make sure that we're safe if we're in an unsafe environment. Mm-hmm. And so when people don't have that artificial lighting or all of these distractions, we reconnect in. And typically the second night, people are already asking, like, is it ready for bed yet? By the third night, they found their natural rhythm. And they're going to bed shortly after the horizon has gotten dark, and they sleep deep in the cooler environment. Most homes the thermostat is set too high. The body doesn't have that cooling component. They don't have the change of light spectrums. And another piece, obesity, right? So 50%, 1 out of every 2 people has a serious weight issue, and that impedes organ function, metabolism, and sleep. And so many parts and pieces. So for the listeners, right, turn off the lights, find a way, even if you got to use little red lights around your house so that you can get around. Let the thermostat automatically cool the house down. Go outside. Put your bare feet. This is actually a jet lag suggestion. When I fly all around, I'm landing in different time zones. And I put my bare feet on the earth and I stand there. And science has now validated that my body is then synchronized. It's like going and resetting my watch or whatever, all that happens automatically these days. It resets that inner caliber. So when I get up in the morning, even on these extremely cold days here in Erie, I still go out there barefoot. Not long enough to get frostbite, but to go out there and I get synced up with the earth's rhythms. And again at night, I let myself get cooler. I'm going to give another tip here. Everybody observe, make a list. What are all the things that you do in that final hour before going to bed? And like NASA has a countdown, 10, 9, 8. They don't change and scramble the order of those numbers. And there's specific sequencing. So if you can just at least do your last 3 or 4 items in the same order before you put your head on the pillow, you will get deeper sleep. The last thing I didn't mention was people don't move enough. These days, we can have all sorts of electronic devices to objectively measure, did I move enough? Did I get enough physicality? That's the single greatest interrupter with going into deep sleep, not moving, more so than turning off a computer and putting the head on the pillow, more so than doing things out of order.
That comment kind of transitions to our next question, because it's one of the things that you talked to me about was how much movement are you getting before you break your fast? And you had recommended, for me in particular, to try and aim for that 2,000 steps or doing some sort of activity that can kind of equate to that, whether it's going up and down the stairs a couple of times or running around the house, making beds in the morning, but however I can do that before I break my fast. So I thought that was kind of a unique thing that I hadn't really considered. So one thing that I kind of want to track over the next month or so and see how much movement I can get before I break my fast. So
again, nature leaves clues all around us. Here in Colorado, people might have heard of a pike, and a piker's been storing all sorts of food and stuff, and then it goes down into the ground and it can stay there, and it doesn't have to really move very much to continue fueling its body. But the vast majority of all animals, they always move before they eat. Even a grazing animal is kind of moving, right? But they're just grazing. So when we're grazing, we're generally moving real gentle. For the ones, and yes, there are some things like a wolf will literally wolf down a bunch of meat in literally like a minute or two, and then they're done for like 3 or 4 or 5 days. And so if we can all just begin moving, that's the first thing. It could be just doing some squats or push-ups or just go up and down the flights of stairs. Here in Erie, there's a lot of multiple level houses here. Move first because it's so abnormal and it's a beautiful gift, right? I love having a kitchen. I love having this at my fingertips. I can get all of nature's essential food groups at the touch of my fingers. But if I don't make it conscious to move first, my whole digestion, absorption, and elimination is compromised and it will deteriorate me. So everybody move before you eat. Just start with where you're at. I had given Lauren that suggestion of at least 2,000 steps to move, but that may not be appropriate. If somebody can only move 2,000 steps in a whole day, they're going to feel like they're a failure. So each person observe what is it that you're doing movement-wise. I generally, I go hours in my day before I break my fast on any given day. And I have to deprogram. And it is true, the very first break fast, right? The very first time I break fast, it's really important with intentional eating. So there is that truth, but it doesn't mean that I eat a snack before going to bed, and as soon as I wake up, oh my gosh, I better have a big plate or bowl or whatever it is of breakfast, so I've got energy to go throughout my day. And this is something that people get to learn through your own personal experience.
Thank you so much, Erik, for being here today. Your passion is truly inspiring, and we are so grateful for the knowledge and insights that you've shared with us this afternoon. See you again next time.
Thank you, Lauren.
That's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Erie Wellness Podcast. I truly appreciate you being a part of this journey. If you loved today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. For more daily wellness inspiration and behind-the-scenes content, be sure to follow me on Instagram at the Erie Wellness Podcast. I can't wait to connect with you again soon.